Welcome everyone to another episode of the Voices of Boyle podcast. This is episode number 20, and for the first time we have a duo on the podcast, Dermot and Paula Lahiff. Dermot, Paula and their family relocated from Dublin in 1985 down to Boyle, where they took over the Lakeshore restaurant out in Rockingham. Over the next 10 years they played a major role in marketing the Forest Park, and they laid the foundations for the success that it has become today. I visited them down in their home in Sligo, and we had a great chat about their memories of Boyle and also the lifelong connections that they still maintain to this day. So here's a little trip down memory lane, and I'm sure most of you will remember the Lahiff family very well. I'd like to welcome Paula and Dermot Lahiff to the Voices of Boyle podcast. I hope you're keeping well, guys.
Yeah,
we are, yeah.
Good. Anyone from my generation or older will remember the Lahiff family well from the days of running the Lakeshore restaurant out in the Forest Park during the 80s and 90s. So to start off, guys, could you both tell us a little bit about your background?
Well, I think I'll let Dermot do that.
Well, background. I was in the hotel management catering business, and I had been in different parts, England, France, back to Ireland, worked with juries, then moved on to run a restaurant up in the Wicklow Mountains, and from there we had a restaurant in Dalkey, and that was in the late 70s and early 80s. And suddenly then the recession hit. The then coalition government removed the concession on business entertainment, and the upmarket business kind of flopped about 1985, 84 maybe. I decided enough was enough, and we were working kind of 40 hours a week, 50 hours a week, 60 hours a week. And we were never able to see our children. Really, it was a question of creche, work, collect, feed, creche, work, and Paula had to do a lot of the to-ing and fro-ing while I did various things to make the business viable. But it just wasn't worth it from any point of view. So 1985, sometime around January of 85, we got a note from the forestry to say that they wanted to interview us regarding our application for a franchise in Boyle. And we were due to go down there. We had been accepted, or we achieved the thing, and we went down to Boyle, but not until April, I think it was. And the Roscommon Herald had headlines like the Forest Park is not reopening for Easter, and it's not reopening for this, that and the other. And primarily the problem was that we had been granted the franchise, but then there was a certain political influence to bear on the forestry, who were civil servants, of course, and the political influence wanted their own candidate. So we were put through the hoops in terms of financial bonds to say we were financially competent to run the thing, and all kinds of hoops and loops. And eventually we arrived, I think it was shortly before probably the latest Easter that's possible, and we literally fell into it, hook, line and sinker.
Hit the ground running.
Yeah.
Got the show going.
So the Lakeshore restaurant under your ownership came in 1985.
Yeah.
And from then, when it was a 10-year stint.
Yeah.
Right. And so
there wasn't a time limit on it.
Okay. So it was.
So that was the point. It could have been for life.
Okay. And you just decided when it came time, that was your time in 95 to move on.
Yeah.
Okay.
Exactly.
Right. Yeah. And so, Paula, you're Can I ask, where did you guys meet, or how did that, in your early days, did you meet?
Well, yes, where did we meet? That's a good one, all right. Well, I met Dermot at a Church of Ireland dance in Greystones, County Wicklow, so the whole thing was we'd get a lift down to the dance from one or other of our parents, but we had to make sure that we got the last bus home 11:30, otherwise we'd have to walk. The whole thing was then, anybody who asked us to dance, we'd say, yeah, do you have a car? So anyway, I met this Galway man, and we started going out together, and I brought him home to meet my dad and mother, and my dad was kind of very strict man, and he kind of comes in and says, hello young man, and who are you, and where do you come from?
What do you do?
Yeah.
The third degree, yeah.
Yes.
And he said, well, I'm from a little village called Peter's Well between Loughrea and Gorge, says Dermot. I don't think you'd know it. So my father was aghast, and he said, you're not Josephine Hayes' son, are you? And as it happened that he used to go out with Dermot's mother, and they only lived within 2 miles down the road from each other. So that is how we met.
That is how you met, right?
Yeah.
So, going then during your time in the Lakeshore restaurant, what was that like running a restaurant back in the 80s, like mid to late 80s?
We had come from the rat race of the upmarket business in the East Coast in Dublin, and suddenly we had a shop and a tourist facility and a restaurant. And the whole thing was, you could talk to people like they were, both sides were human. And the difference was, I couldn't believe, for example, that you could stand behind a counter in a shop, hand something out and get paid for it, as opposed to the hours and hours of laborious work you had to spend in an upmarket restaurant, doing fiddly bits to present something that was of value to people who were prepared to pay for it.
Right. And I have a vague recollection, but didn't you live behind the restaurant? Wasn't there a house?
Yeah, there was.
Yeah, I don't know why.
The residence which came with the franchise.
Okay.
It is there no longer.
No.
But yeah.
Because I remember it looked pretty big, but then when you're young, it probably looked bigger than what it actually was. But it looked pretty big of a house, a pretty big house back then.
Well, it wasn't. It was a little bungalow.
It was more kind of a chalet type. It wasn't the most luxurious, but the location was absolutely incredible.
Yeah.
I mean, we had been to Lough about 4 or 5 years earlier with the caravan, with the two of the kids, or one I think, when he was very young. And I had kind of said, God, I have to come back here.
You loved it.
Not thinking that it would be as a business.
Right.
And to believe that we had this house in the middle of the park where you could, I mean, from September each year until March, it was yours. The whole park was yours.
Yeah, because no one
we could bring the kids out to see the bats under Drum Bridge, or you'd hear the badgers grunting at night, or the deer.
Yeah.
And we had a dog who used to chase the deer down the tunnel, which was, of course, open to everybody then.
Back then, yeah.
And the elements.
And because back then, not many people used to avail of the facilities of the park, because obviously it's done up now, it's more developed, but back then, like, you would never really, people from Boyle would never really venture out to go for a walk there the way we do now. Yeah. So as you said, you would have had that Forest Park to yourself during them months, really.
Yeah.
No one else
yes.
There were a few regulars who used to come out.
Yeah.
You could get an annual ticket for the local people.
Okay.
Yeah.
Especially.
Yeah.
But I think there was a certain disillusionment with the locals in terms of how it had transpired, because originally, as I understand it, the park was donated to the community, but they didn't have the capacity or the facilities to run it.
Sure.
So therefore they passed it on to the forestry.
Okay.
And of course the forestry had their own ideas about it. So there was a little bit of some previous incumbents in the park weren't exactly community minded, let's say.
Yeah.
So there was always a bit of a standoff, we felt, and we had to work at rebuilding a certain amount of contact between ourselves and the community.
I'd say so, yeah.
Well, I suppose when we went down, and it was just before Easter, as Dermot said, we just put our nose to the grindstone and started working. And then we used to employ fifth-year students, and we had the assistance of a lady from CERT, which was the training body, catering training body. So we trained these young people in, and they were lovely. They really were. And they were delighted to have the few extra bob for the summer. And they were the waiting staff, and they did everything. And then the shop was Bernie Regan and Kate Aries, those two ladies, and they ran the shop, and they ran a great show down there. We sold everything from cigarettes to basic groceries. You get your pint of milk and your paper, and it was good. And then, of course, on the fringes we had Jerry Sweeney, who ran the boat, the boat, and Pete Walsh, who was in charge, his family, who were in charge of the smaller boats. And then the forestry lads were around. Michael Costello, who was the head forester, and he had a love for.
Michael loved the park and nature, and he was great. Occasionally we had a little bit of conflict between our business and his love of nature and the park, but we got on extremely well because we mutually did love the location anyway.
Yeah.
So,
and did you face any challenges running a restaurant back in those days, like that stood out for you?
The weather. The weather was the whole. I can remember emptying one very hot summer's day, and there was a big crowd in the park, and they were coming from all angles. And I can remember emptying 4 freezers of ice cream in an hour, and they would just appear from nowhere. So, and then of course on the other days, you'd be all set, you'd have everything in, and you'd look up at the clouds and you'd say it's not going to rain, and it would rain. So it's
unpredictable, and especially with our weather in Ireland, very unpredictable.
Well, actually, that summer of 85 was not a summer at all. I think, if I recall, between the time we arrived there and September, we had something like 9 or 10 days which were rain-free that whole summer. And I know Jerry Sweeney on the boats and ourselves looked out the window and wonder had we been sold a pup, as they say. Because, but don't forget, statistically, it was quoted that Lahiffs Forest Park was second to Dublin Zoo at the time in terms of visitor numbers.
Was it?
So it was up there in the top 3 for an extended period of time.
Okay.
Yeah.
But the first time I ventured into town, after we kind of got everything set up, I couldn't believe it, because people kept coming over and wishing me luck and and welcoming us and our family to the park. And this was just unreal to me, because city life, everybody's anonymous, they just get around doing their thing, no one talks to anybody. But in Boyle it was different.
Yeah.
They went out of their way to make us feel at home.
It's. I was recently talking to Christy Wynn, and he mentioned something of what someone described to him. If a stranger came into Boyle, Boyle was a stranger's paradise, because everyone would be so welcoming. And what you said there adds to that, because people wanted to see people do well.
Yeah.
And Jerry Dodd, he said, if you can't get it in Boyle, you don't need it. And I thought,
it was true, actually.
Well said, exactly,
But even I remember Vincent Regan came in. Vincent ran the hotel, Vincent and Angela Regan, and he came into the shop very shortly after we arrived there, and he said, I had a notion of applying for this as well, he says, and you got it anyway, and good luck to you.
Yeah.
If you make a bags of it, you'll hear about it, but if you succeed, the best of luck to you. And subsequently, I used to, if they wanted a holiday or something, I would, in the winter period, I would look after the hotel for them.
Brilliant. So
it was that kind of, there was always a healthy tension in Boyle. There was, 3 religions,
Yes.
and they all got on incredibly well.
Yeah.
There was 2 strong political persuasions, very strong, who kind of at one stage could easily go, and on the other hand, if it came to something for Boyle, Boyle came first.
Right.
And there was no...
And because our children were in school, I mean, whatever you give back to the community, you get it back 110%.
Of course, yeah.
And
As
then,
the way a community should be.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Children
unreal.
draw you into the community anyway. Within a week, there were kids coming to the house to play with our kids. And
Brilliant.
I suppose maybe our kids were a bit of a novelty anyway.
Because I was going to ask, what was it like to adjust to life in Boyle when you moved? But obviously, from what you were saying, it was pretty smooth, I think.
Yeah, it was. And our suppliers were very loyal. I mean, for example, if I did empty that freezer of the 4 things of ice cream, you'd ring up HB or as it was at the time and say, listen, we're running out, can you help us? And even if it was a bank holiday weekend, they would come down and replenish your essentials. Now, where would you get that?
I know, because it was great back in those days. As you said, the community was so strong.
But there were two great schools, the primary schools, the girls and the boys' school were great schools.
Yeah.
And I remember distinctly Peter, our son Peter, who developed a love of literature, was probably through Master Fallon, as he used to call him.
That's right, Jack
who
Fallon.
Encouraged kids to bring home books and read them. And that's where Peter got into the whole language literary thing. And I also remember May Moran, one of the teachers in the girls' school, who one of our children had a negative experience in a previous school before we moved, and she spontaneously said she would take our kid for an hour after the others had left, while she was waiting to collect her own kids, and she would give her a leg up, so to speak. And after a month, she said, that girl is doing great. And
Brilliant,
that girl has done great ever since. And they've all done great because of Boyle.
Of course, yeah.
Where they did all their...
Yeah, Peter runs his own language school.
You mentioned that, which is brilliant, yeah.
And it's great. Yeah. They're all doing their own thing.
And it shows from those early days of Jack Fallon, maybe prompting them to bring home the extra books and do reading. That's it. Ended up being his career.
And then one day in the early, I was looking for a babysitter, and there was a knock on this door, and this lady at the door, which was Breda Dodd, complete with a welcoming lemon cake, and she said, I hear you need a babysitter. And we said yes, and herself and Avril, who was 3 years old at the time, they formed an instant bond. And they were all around town. Avril knew everybody, and what's more, everybody knew Avril. And then another person who was very good to Avril was Margaret Smith. Now, Margaret used to babysit for the Sloanes, and Timmy Sloane, she used to come and call for Avril, and they would all head off to the park together,
Great.
And then Avril would say to the visitors, my name is Avril Lahiff, I can show you around if you like.
Margaret was a very upright, good Protestant lady, and it was only after a long time that she even mentioned her past, and she had been a nurse apparently in the Second World War, and she was of that age, and she was a wonderful lady, and she reared, I think, virtually Timmy Sloan and his sister, whose name escapes me right now. But
and they're still good friends.
Yeah,
Avril and Timmy Sloan and Timmy's wife and children. So she goes up the north every now and again to say hello to him.
It's great that they keep in contact, and it shows
friends for life.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So another topic which I definitely wanted to cover was the hot air balloons. So 1979 was the first hot championships that came to Boyle, and then I think there was only a handful of 5 or 10 balloons that seemingly went up. Then it went away and went around different parts of the country, but you guys were instrumental part of the committee that got it back in 89 to Boyle, I believe. Mm-hmm. Maybe you could talk to us a little bit about that.
Yeah, I think actually it was Ronan O'Conneilla who gave us a phone call and said, look, I've heard that the National Organisation of Hot Air Ballooning are looking for a venue, and said you should have a shot at convincing them to come to Boyle. And that's how it was, with people were always interested in developing something in Boyle. I contacted them, and yes, they had been there, as you said, a few years earlier with a few, but the thing had got bigger, and they agreed to come. And the first year was that particular year,
89. Yeah.
89, and it was just wonderful.
Magic.
Because it happened in the autumn, and you had this kind of frosty, foggy weather, and they, of course, wanted to fly with the dictation of the air currents. So they flew at a particular time. They knew how the currents or the particular day and the heat and the cold and whatever would affect their flight patterns. And
I can almost to this day hear the whoosh of the gas
going
in. Yes. Yeah, and also the smell of croissants and coffee. I can almost
kind of
smell
7 o'clock
it now,
in the morning,
because we would get up at 6 o'clock and we'd have all the croissants and pots of coffee
ready
for when the crews came in at 7. We'd have all ready to go.
It was such a big asset and attraction for the town back then.
Well, basically you had 200 or 300 people who needed accommodation for a week in Boyle, and then we had the various events in the pubs as well at night. And also, in order to finance a certain amount of it, the balloonists agreed to put advertising signs on their baskets. So we had to get those printed up, and not flags as such, but publicity. But they had to be of a certain material, durable material.
Yeah.
So we got those printed up locally as well.
And then we had this a pub crawl, I suppose you would call it, but it was a treasure hunt around the pubs in Boyle, because we were trying to bring the balloonists into the community. So we had to go down to every pub, and I don't remember how many pubs there were in Boyle at the time, but we had to go in and plant a clue in each pub. And of course have a drink at the same time.
Of course. And there was a lot of pubs back then.
There's plenty of pubs.
Exactly.
Took a few days.
But we also ran a painting competition for the kids, because the balloonists would have gone to the schools and brought the kids out into the tethered balloons. And of course the children thought this was just amazing. And the painting competition, there were so many entries that we almost didn't have enough room for them all down the corridor were pictures. So it was impossible to choose a winner, but we did, and it was just another good thing from the ballooning.
The success of it was dependent on a much wider community than just Boyle, particularly the farmers. And if we're talking about farmers from Roscommon to near Longford, to usually because the prevailing winds in that, they went either south, east, or northeast occasionally. But it was on that kind of a loop of width to where they flew. And we depended on the cooperation of farmers, for example, who the first year, I think there was we had to do a little bit of gentle persuasion,
right,
because you mentioned the swoosh of the
animals,
of the gas things, burners, and particularly the Simmental cattle were fairly flighty,
get very afraid,
and horses and even sheep. So there were a few. My gap was broken. My sheep did a runner.
Yeah.
But eventually, after the first year, they realised that there was a way around this, because don't forget that they were selling the food to the B&Bs and the restaurants. So it was what goes around comes around in that regard.
Yeah, there was a bit of a relationship.
They eventually started to go to the mart a week early before the ballooning, rather than a week after, which would be normal, in order to have them off the field. And there was a lot of goodwill, a lot of support, and a lot of help.
I even went up in the balloon myself.
Did you?
And it was incredible, because when we landed, we had to go into the nearest house to say where we were, because it was before the days of mobile phones and social media and all that. And then the rescue team would come out and get them. I can remember this elderly man saying, "Do they speak English?" So it was
Are they from Mars?
Yeah. Where do these people come from with a balloon in my field,
But some of the balloonists couldn't believe it, where they land in a field, and the next thing, the woman of the house arrives out with a tray with cups of tea and scones and God knows what, or
great generosity,
invited in,
And how was the competition judged? That's one thing I never could understand. How was it judged, or was there a way of judging it?
They had various events. I remember one was the splash and dash. So they would aim to fly over Lough Key, for example, the lake,
very low,
and then they would go as low as possible, tip the water, and away again.
Right.
But the trick was, if they went too low, they got submerged in the water. So it was literally dangerous. Splash and dash away.
Then that actually makes me remember. There was, I think, a raffle of a car at one stage and the keys, I think, were sticking out of the water on the floating device.
Oh, that's right.
Yeah,
and they had that splash and dash.
Yeah.
So I remember a few of us were up on the tower looking down where it was near McDermott's castle, the floating device was. And I always remember one balloon got down and we could see them trying to reach for, at the time, the keys of the car, but they didn't get it.
Yeah.
But so that must have been a part of that splash and dash.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
Yeah. God, I can still remember that very well.
And then there was an element of distance travelled or whatever.
Right.
Because there was quite a bit of organisation in the background. Like they had to get flight clearance from Sligo airport at the time, and they had to fly below a certain level, because planes that were landing in Sligo were at a certain height over Boyle when they were coming into Sligo. So they had to. It's not just a simple thing of lighting your burner and heading up into the air. It was quite a bit of art in it.
And then one other thing was then the survivors' dinner or night at the end of each week was a big do, because they come into the town as they did every night, but this was then a bigger gathering at the end where they'd have some little contest.
Well, the Forest Park Hotel was packed. I mean, it was just a huge night.
Yeah.
It really was.
Yeah.
I as a result, I knew all the B&B ladies as well around, Mrs. Kelly, Mrs. Harrington, Amy Taylor, too numerous to mention.
Bridie Gallagher, I think.
Bridie Gallagher, yeah.
And I think she was up until recently. I don't know if she still is, but she used to have regulars that she'd.
Yeah, she was an amazing woman.
Yeah.
And a great cook as well, I think I heard.
Absolutely, she used to talk about her her husband who had died, and she said,
Tom.
he
Gallagher,
bet on 2 flies climbing up the wall.
I think it was Tom. There's a great story. We mentioned Jack Fallon earlier on, the teacher, but his wife was quite a character too, Connie Fallon.
Connie, yes. Yeah.
And Connie stood for election for the Labour Party on one occasion, which of course I suppose was a bit of a wing and a prayer for having a chance between Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael, as I said earlier. But Connie apparently met Tom Gallagher after the election. This is the story I heard anyway. And Tom said to her, sorry you didn't get elected, Connie, but I voted for you anyway. And she said, well, you're a damn liar, Tom, because I only got 1 vote, and that was my husband. Or something like that, the story goes anyway. So there were loads of characters at the time.
Yeah, and I think, it's a lot to do with the history of any town is the characters as well as the businesses and that. But you've been involved in numerous committees as well during your 10-year stint in Boyle. The town twinning, I believe, was one of them as well. As well as the scouts. We get onto the scouts, but the town twinning, I think, as well.
The town twinning was great. It was up and running by the time we arrived in Boyle, and we hosted lots of French students in our time over there. And our kids went back. And in fact, even to this day, we can sit around the table as a family and talk in French, which is just totally down to the town training, And there was a couple of funny things that happened, but I'll tell you one of them. We brought a basket of shamrock with us on one weekend when we were going over as a gift for St. Patrick's Day. Okay, it was like a mushroom basket full to the top of the shamrocks. Look, and that evening when we were sitting down to dinner, we saw our shamrock set up on the table as a salad. They thought it was a salad, right. So we had to explain that one. That was different. And they used to dye the aperitifs green in honour of St. Patrick's Day, and. Then one year, we wanted to present to them a beautiful miniature Celtic cross, which had been done by the students in Feelies. And it was very heavy. So Clive Rowe had it in a big duffel bag, and all was fine until we got to the security at the airport. And what's this? We showed up on the camera, a Celtic cross, and at the time in Ireland, there was a lot of these genuine Celtic crosses being stolen and brought out of the country. So we were taken to the back room, and we had to produce a receipt and everything before they would let us through with our cross. And I think to this day it's probably still there.
It's
in the Irish Garden in St. Witt's.
Yeah.
So St. Witt's was
that was the town we were twinned with.
Yeah. Right. And how did it work in terms of, was there some sort of agreements that students went over and students came to Boyle? And was there certain conditions or stuff that had to be met? Was it like learning French for us Irish and learning English for the French?
I think it originated from our introduction to the EC, as it was then, or the EU now, or whatever they call it these days. But so their idea was to cultural exchange.
Okay.
So some towns were twinned with towns in Germany, and some, particularly I think Germany and France seem to be the two main ones. And France, yes, St. Witt's was the one which was twinned with Boyle. And loads of St. Witt's was a bit more of an affluent, you could say a suburban town of Paris, really.
Okay.
And quite wealthy generally.
Yeah.
So they used to arrive over and stay in bed and breakfast or whatever, and spend a few days in Boyle, and then
but they were welcomed and dined,
go over and
looked after very well.
Yeah.
and brought to all the places in Boyle, and
Yeah.
yeah.
So it was a
And then I was the chairperson of the committee in its final days, because these things run their course. And I think because they were learning other languages other than French in the schools, there wasn't as much of a need to have conversational French. And it just kind of petered out.
Yeah.
But it was, as I said, people got great times out of it.
Yeah. Yeah. And Dermot, yourself, you were involved in, I remember from my days in the Scouts, but you were heavily involved in the Scouts.
Yeah.
And what was that like?
Well, it seemed to just happen. I mean, nothing was contrived. You just were absorbed into the community. From the time, say, the first autumn that we were there, when the things began to slow down, I remember particularly the Feelies and the Candons were two of the people who invited us to various social occasions. And then I think James Candon was involved with the Scouts from that stage. But our son joined the Scouts then, Peter, who wasn't big into football or whatever, but in order to develop the notion of some kind of activity outdoors, I thought the Scouts might be a good idea. And of course, the minute he went in, suddenly the committee said, "Will you join the committee?" So I joined the committee, which was a very vibrant committee. I mean, the support of people like Mary Ryan and Maura Clark and Anne Clark. They stand out. Those people were really committed and gave an awful lot of time to the committee.
And it was a big organisation. I remember because I was in the Cubs as well, and then the transition to the Scouts, and I always remember Adventure Scout was a lot, and I remember one trip we did. I think it's down this direction, Baltrillick, or is it further down?
That's right.
I do remember going down there,
and it was Mary Coleman.
Yeah, at that stage there was a bus. They had a bus, Scout bus, and they used to go to Ballintrellick nearly every year. Yeah. That's down off the Sligo Donegal Road under Benweskin.
That's right.
And one of the great appeals there was the road which everything goes uphill.
Oh, the illusion.
The illusion, yes.
Okay.
So this road appeared to be slanted upwards, and if you stopped your car and took the handbrake off, the car would appear to roll uphill. So just under Benweskin there and under Trustmore.
Right.
That was...
and were you in the Scouts for many years?
Well, eventually then, I think it was probably the following year, about 96, they were getting kind of desperate for a Scout leader. And Seamus Flynn, who had been doing it for many years and was probably an ideal person for the job, and I admire the way he could communicate with the boys and yet could hold a firm line, if need be. But I took over. They convinced me to take on the job, and I took it over and put my heart and soul into it.
Yeah.
Because I really thought it was worthwhile.
Of course.
It was denominated then, if you like, CBSI.
Right.
I would have preferred if it was interdenominational, but you went with the flow anyway. Yeah. But within a short space of time, I was really into it.
Yeah.
Now, I think maybe I might have been a little bit unconventional in some ways, that I believe that adventure was the important thing. And
that's actually interesting, because one story that I remember from my days in the Scouts. You remember where we had the little annex where we had the Scouts?
Yeah, yeah.
And then you opened the door and you'd go into the complex where you played the football.
That's right, yeah.
And of course, we were all mad for football. So I remember you coming out and myself, and I don't know who else came up to you and says, can we play football? And you says, but this is the Scouts. If you want to play football, join Boyle Celtic.
Yeah.
And I remember saying, well, I am already in Boyle Celtic as well. But you said, yeah, well, this time is for the Scouts. And you were so right.
Yeah.
Because you were there to learn different skills and you could play the football anytime.
Yeah.
But so interesting, you said you were kind of unconventional in your way, but you were right.
Yeah, maybe. And I have to say, James Candon was a primary, what would you say, dragged me up to his level or down to his level, whichever way you want. And it was on for adventure.
Yeah.
And then he suggested, as the guys he was with, we had the first Roscommon and the 11th Roscommon Scouts. But as they grew older, he suggested starting the Venture Scouts. Some more conventional members of the scouting fraternity weren't totally enamoured with the notion of trying to keep the lid on 16-year-olds or whatever. So there was a little bit of apprehension over it, let's say. But we persevered, and James started the Venture Scouts. And not alone did he start it, but by God did he bring them on some great adventures to... they cycled to Paris, and St. Witt's at the time. And,
so it's great.
And it was tremendous, and they were in all kinds of winter camping events and whatever. And then James asked me would I take over the Scouts, the Venture Scouts. And I knew it was a hard act to follow, so I was a little bit apprehensive.
Yeah.
But I remember on one occasion we headed out towards Roscommon, towards the middle of Roscommon. I'm trying to remember Loughlin. And when we arrived, we went to the local shop, and the woman said, "What are you doing here at this hour, at this time of the year?" And it was a frosty, starry night, wonderful starry night. And we said, "Oh, we're camping out." And she said, "You're not." She says, "There's a house that we've just abandoned about 2 years ago when we moved in here, down the road there, and that's where you're going." She wouldn't hear of us going anywhere. So anyway, we went into the house, and it was pretty rag order now, but the upstairs was fine, clean, wooden floors. So I packed the lads off upstairs and said, "That's where you're keeping, guys." And I stayed downstairs. But how was I going to stay downstairs? It was pretty grotty. So I put a cupboard press, whatever you like to call it, on flat on the ground, and opened the two doors and got into it and slept in that. But some stage during the night, the local lads decided they were going to give us a bit of a fright. So they arrived after the disco or whatever, shining torches in.
Right.
So at this stage I had one door of the cupboard closed. So slowly I opened the door and I put my hand up into the light. And, "Oh, Jesus, there's a ghost in there. Come on, guys." And they were gone like a flash. But subsequently, we then, again with James's help, we went to Switzerland. We went to Paris, first of all, got the train down to Geneva, saw Geneva, and then went on to Kandersteg, which was a permanent scout centre, international scout centre. And that's where the boys discovered things like roasty and cheese fondue and some very attractive Portuguese female scouts as well. So,
always a big attraction.
Yeah.
So of course, in order to do all this, there had to be fundraising to be done,
of course.
and the scout fair was the highlight of the scouting year. I don't know whether you remember that.
No, I can't say I do. I just can't remember it
We
offhand.
used to get the big saucepans from the restaurant and make popcorn and sell them in kind of twirls of paper, or or plastic cups of my waddy for 10 pence or whatever it was at the time.
Okay.
And then we made loads of money. There was a Wheel of Fortune, it wasn't called that, Tombola, I think they call it. But that's where the money making was made.
And then only recently, because when I was talking to James, he mentioned that you got recognised for all the hard work you've done over the years in Creighton's. They had a bit of a celebration for you, and kind of like an induction into a Hall of Fame, if you like.
Well, I don't know about the Hall of Fame, but I often wondered, over the years, and occasionally we'd meet somebody in Sligo, one of the lads in Sligo, or on the train or whatever, and they'd come up to us and say, "How are you, Dermot? How are you, Paula? How's it going?" And that was great. But I wondered how much of it they really remembered, or did they really appreciate, I suppose, in fairness, the amount of effort that the adults put into it.
Yeah.
Not alone myself, but James Cannon and the committee and all the other leaders and whatever.
Yeah.
I got this call from Kieran O'Reilly. And Kieran said, Dermot, we were thinking of having a little reunion for the Venture Scouts and that, and would you be interested in coming? And I said, would I what? I was very pleasantly surprised, and I thought it made every bit of work that we did for the Scouts worthwhile.
Yeah, of course, and it's always nice to get recognised for your time, effort. To go in and to build, a really good organisation, which the Scouts undoubtedly was. And you need people like yourself, James, and all the other committee members that were involved in it. Otherwise, these things don't happen.
Yeah. But it was really I was pleasantly surprised, and more than. Kieran O'Reilly worked very hard to get everybody together. I think we had to cancel it once because of the coronavirus thing, and wait for a later stage. Adrian Regan had done a lot of work on assembling a video of various photographs and memorabilia from the Scouts, and they really put a lot of work into it. And then they presented us with a plaque each for our efforts, which was really nice. And that plaque is treasured more than an awful lot of.
It represents a lot of good times, obviously, and a lot of work in the community. So it's always nice, I think, to get recognised in that way.
Yeah, but it's not only about the recognition, but it's the fact that maybe you did impart some value to these 10 kids who were now adults themselves. And
not only that, but it was a great bond between father and son.
Of course.
So Peter, he's kind of climbed every mountain around here ever since. And even on abroad, he's climbed mountains, climbed up Machu Picchu. He did...
he's been around.
He's been around, and he brought his father with him on the Camino.
Camino. And I went on walked on
a section of it, or the whole lot?
He carried his father's duffel bag as well as his own rucksack.
Yeah, he was much fitter than I was.
Eventually, they got there.
I willingly handed it over to him.
Yeah, exactly. So moving on then, 95 came. You decided times were you wanted to move on to a new chapter.
That's right.
And did you left Boyle then, and did you move down here to Sligo, or did you go somewhere else before you?
Well, the death knell came at this stage. I needed some kind of a occupation during the winter, and CERT, the National Hotel Training Authority, had asked me would I manage these training centres in wherever. What they did was they took over hotels during the winter that were not being used.
Yeah.
And they recruited a load of people who were interested in a career in the hotel business. So they brought them, they stayed in the hotel, and therefore they were the residents, if you like. But also some of them were doing the house assistants. Some of them did the chefing. Some of them did the bar, although it wasn't drink, but they learnt about all the various aspects of bar work. And then for 3 or nearly 4 months, they would learn the skills of catering. And the idea was that we would then try and get them employment and an induction into the hotel business. So in 1995, in January, I was in Dingle. And that's where I used to... they asked me would I go to Dingle, and Dingle was a hell of a trek from Boyle.
Back in those days.
So in those days, so I got onto McGowan's bus, and I asked them if we could get enough people to fill the bus as we progressed to Dingle, would they organise a bus? And there was a great driver, Pat was his name, who used to drive McGowan's bus from Boyle every Sunday.
Can I just come in now with my story about the bus? Okay. You can cut it out if you like.
Not at all.
No,
not at all.
But anyway, it was organised that I would spend a weekend in Dingle. Okay, children all sorted, and I was to meet McGowan's bus at the Lakeshore restaurant at 6 a.m. in order to get to Dingle, that evening. So I was packed up everything. It was a beautiful, crisp morning. I could remember it well. The deer were grazing on the lawn, and I was standing in front of the restaurant, and I hear this car coming. Okay, so I said, God, I wonder who that is now. So the car comes up and it sees me in the headlights and it kind of rolls to a stop. It was the cop car. So the window was rolled down and the guard said, hello, Mrs. Lahiff, are you all right? And I said, oh yeah, I'm fine. I'm just waiting for a bus. I'm waiting for a bus at 6 o'clock in the morning at this hour of the day. I said, no way. So I was trying to explain myself why I would be standing outside the restaurant at 6 o'clock in the morning waiting for a bus. And then I saw more headlights coming, bigger headlights. This was McGowan's bus coming for me, the one I was waiting for. So all was explained, and the guardie helped me lift up myself and my overnight bag onto the bus, and we headed off for Dingle. So
that was the end. That was your 10-year stint.
Yeah, exactly
in Boyle. So
we picked up 3 or 4 guys from Boyle, and then headed for Athlone, and picked up a few more as we went along Athlone, and then down towards Limerick, and then towards Dingle, and we left Boyle at 5 o'clock in the day, arrived in Dingle at God knows 11 o'clock or 12 o'clock at night, depending on weather and whatever. And that was every Sunday for 13, 14 weeks. Yeah. That's how it was.
Oh wow!
So but the time did come when we had to move on.
Yeah, it was time.
Yeah,
it was time.
Yeah,
it was time.
Well, I got a phone call then as it was started to say in Dingle in January of 95. This was these large multinational consultants based in Dublin, and we are involved in doing the assessments for a new development in Lough Forest Park with hotels and chalets.
That was a big
God knows what,
yeah.
And would you provide us with the information about your business?
Yeah.
And of course, the gander was up anyway the minute I heard this, for 2 reasons. I thought to start building chalets in in Lockheed Forest Park wasn't quite the thing.
No.
But also I knew it was the death knell of our little franchise.
Yeah.
So I more or less kind of said, 2 turkeys vote for Christmas. Yeah. So there was no way I was cooperating with them.
Yeah.
But anyway, there was some guy from America who was supposed to be a president of some corporate bank or whatever who was behind this. But then we realised that there was a lot of, no balloons at this stage, but a lot of hot air still anyway.
Yeah.
And it went on. And the Roscommon Herald was constantly full of notions of this hotel and all the rest. And in a way, I was in 2 minds. What are we going to do now? Do we try and get a foothold into this development because survival is the name of the game?
Yeah.
And I was conflicted between that and the beautiful environment which
was going to
be decimated. Really.
Yeah.
So anyway, it petered out after a long time. But there was, in the meantime, because of the publicity, it's amazing how it affects people's perception of things, and the numbers began to drop in the summer.
Yeah.
And not alone that, but also we were getting a bit of stick from the public coming in. What are you doing destroying this lovely park? And why are you doing this? As if we were doing it,
you know. You were involved.
And they stopped cutting the grass on the lawn and everything was let go.
Things,
you know.
Yeah, things were kind of, in a state of limbo.
Yeah.
So in 92, I thought, well, I better be looking around for something else to keep the fire burning.
Yeah.
So I got a job as catering manager in St Andrew's College in Sligo.
And I worked for Leader, helping people to start their own businesses.
Wow,
and I had a little secretarial business myself on the side.
Yeah, so that was a nice transition then out from
well, it was a little bit, it was difficult enough, change is always, when you have 4 new mouths to feed.
Yeah, true as well,
It's not easy.
And but we didn't leave, we still ran the park until 95.
Yeah.
Because I was determined that really the powers that be had kind of simply marched all over our livelihood without too much ado. And I was determined I was going to stick to my guns. And really, it was with the help of Tom Callan that I took on the Forestry and Wildlife Service, who were still civil servants. Mm-hmm. Nothing to do with the locals. This was Dublin. And it was thanks to him that we got compensated, which was important because we had lost money in the last year or 2 in the business. But it's incredible how things turn around. And I'm a great believer in this notion that what goes around comes around, and if you do somebody a turn, you'll get a turn. Even when in Boyle, we always included the town in any itineraries. And I remember Dick McGee saying to me, business from those school buses was great, for example, for the shops in Boyle at the time. And he appreciated the fact of what we'd done there. But anyway, back to the guy who was fairly high up in the forestry. Purely, it's just an interesting story how things go around. When we were running the restaurant in Dalkey, we always took in 1 or 2 of the CERT students for work experience. And there was one girl in particular who we had to work quite hard to get her enthused and get her working. I remember saying to her on one occasion, there's CERT's way, your way, and my way. And my way is what goes here. I remember trying to get her. But anyway, as it transpired, when the representative arrived down, I didn't know until afterwards. But he was a family member of this girl's. And when we had finished the negotiations, he said to me, my family have never forgotten what you did for that girl in Dalkey.
Nice.
And that was why he was a bit more amenable to compensation.
Right. So it played in your favour for being decent.
And then
15 years earlier,
we built our house then eventually, and now my house is totally accessible for disabled living.
Mm-hmm.
I am in my little electric chair, and we're supposed to get your house. You have to be able to go around your house on the inside and on the outside, and that's what I have achieved here. We have the most beautiful view.
You do.
And we have nice neighbours, and we are maturing like a good wine, as Ronan O'Keneally would say. And there we are.
And looking out at the lake, you've kept very close to the lake, haven't you?
We have
over the years.
Yeah.
So it's and is there anything else that you'd like to touch on that I wouldn't have touched on so far?
Apart from the social integration facilitated by the Feelies and the Candons, one of the great pleasures was that occasionally we would get a call from Ard Carn, from Ronan O'Keneally, to say, I've just opened a very good bottle of Cote Tyrone. And we knew that Ronan meant a good bottle. He says, do you want to come down and have a glass? And of course, we'd hightail it. It was only 10 minutes away.
Exactly.
We'd hightail it down at 6 or 7 o'clock in the evening, and sometimes there was more than one bottle.
Yeah.
At that stage, you could just nip in the back avenue, and so you weren't on the public road. It was very handy.
But they're very good friends, and we have some very good friends even to this day in Boyle.
Yeah.
And we keep in touch with births, marriages and deaths.
Brilliant, yeah.
Through Kathleen Camden. She keeps us informed.
But
in a special place in our hearts.
Yeah, of course.
About Boyle.
Yeah.
Things have developed too in a way. James Camden and myself used to take an open open rowing boat, and travel. We travelled from Boyle up to Enniskillen, throw a tent up on the side, cook something up, and maybe have a glass of wine if we felt like it, and move on the next day. And we travelled from Enniskillen. From Boyle to Enniskillen, from Boyle to Portumna, and eventually then we got a bit long in the tooth for this adventurous stuff. So James came up with the notion that we'd put a crew together. So we did, and it was constituted. The Boyle part of it was Pádraig. Come to me in a minute. Brian Kelly, James, myself, and then there were two others. Barry Feely, yes,
and Ronan.
And Ronan joined us on one or two occasions, and we used to take a barge down the river or a cruiser, and for 5 or 6 days.
Lovely.
In the just off season.
Men only.
Of course.
What stays on board.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's great. Good stories.
Yeah.
And, I've always said that you guys were instrumental in making Lockheed what it is today, because as we know, it's extremely busy and touristy these days. Yeah. And you guys back in the day helped make cement them foundations, because not only with the restaurant but your involvement with the hot air balloons and the different committees in town, it's made really Lockheed what it is.
It comes to mind there were a number of other events too, which were like the Nissan Classic Cycle Race.
Yes, I
went
remember
through
that.
Lockheed Forest Park. There was also a marathon canoe race from Boyle to Carrick-on-Shannon, which was a bit of a novelty, because they had to open the gates and they had to have a special diet of. Some of them in order to maintain their fluid levels during the rowing thing, had to eat some like 5 pounds of spaghetti or pasta or something. So, yeah, there was always something. There were quite a few cross-country races, including an international schools one, once or twice. Remember the people from Scotland. I still have a tie somewhere that some of the Scottish crowd gave me. There's all these kind of momentums and memories. But boy, was it a fabulous place to live, in the centre of that park.
And it's great that you have all them memories to share with everyone that's listening, because there'll be a lot of eager ears to listen to your story, and it's great. And
well, thanks very much to you.
No, thank you very much for
allowing
inviting
us
me
to bring up all these memories.
Yeah, no, and thank you very much for inviting me down there to your lovely house. It's
great.
It's been great. So thank you very much, both of you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So that's it for this episode, folks. I hope you enjoyed listening to it as much as I enjoyed recording it. If you like the content, we'd really appreciate it if you could share it. You can follow us on Facebook by searching for Voices of Boyle, and you can also contact us on our website by visiting voicesofboyle.com. We're always looking for new guests, so if you'd like to be on the show, or if you know someone who you'd like to join us, please reach out to us via our Facebook page or website. Thanks very much, and we'll chat to you again soon.